That last video kinda almost went somewhere. I genuinely expected it to sit there with single-digit view count and get no traction. But there's actual views and comments and stuff. And even channel subscribers. So thanks for that. That's awesome and very unexpected. However, it also attracted a bunch of dislikes too, which tells me I probably didn't explain myself the best. Hopefully I can do a better job today. But before I do, I kinda need to answer a question. One that was asked in the comments of my first video. Just who the hell am I, and why would I have any more insight here than anyone else? Fair question, to be honest. Poorly worded, but a reasonable subject to inquire about. So, I am a software engineer. I write video games for a living, and I've been doing that for almost 2 decades. More if you count when I was doing it as a side hustle before it became my day job. I haven't worked for Cloud Imperium, but almost all that time has been spent on 2 very long-running projects. One is a series that is now a quarter of a century old at this point and is still going strong, and the other is a decade old already and continually growing. In both cases, they have long-term support for user-generated content, and both of these projects can still import content made in the early days. Anyway, enough about me and what my background is. 4.0 got pushed to live-ish recently, and I have unfinished business talking to the internet about meshing. Before server meshing, we had a hard cap on what could be in the Star Citizen universe. While it's not strictly an area, it's more a total count of stuff, it's roughly the size of Stanton. Why? Because every time Stanton outgrew it, the game wouldn't run, and someone headed off to the art department and told them to cut that shit out. Like when they tried adding 6,000 caves, for example. We all want 6,000 caves, but a single server couldn't handle 6,000 caves, so we got like 200 or something instead. Servers do dynamically load the areas they need, and will unload the areas they don't. With all the players close together, they do run better than when all the players are all spread out. That's one of the reasons a fresh server runs better than an old one. People haven't got to too many places yet. This results in 3.24 having a player cap of about 100 players per shard. Meshing promises to totally fix all of this. Firstly, game servers look after sections of the universe, not the whole thing. So you can have more stuff in the whole universe than a single game server can handle. Also, game servers looking after smaller areas can host much higher player counts. The static server meshing design CIG are using for 4.0 splits the replication layer and a bunch of other stuff into a service they're calling the hybrid. Instead of you connecting to a game server when you log in, you connect to a hybrid. And that hybrid talks to several back-end servers which CIG refer to as dedicated game servers or DGSs. So instead of one server being one shard, it's now one hybrid that's one shard. In theory, there's a virtuous circle where the more servers you have, the better the whole thing runs. Only that's not quite how things went through the testing phase. Early in 2024, CIG started doing public meshing tests and quickly discovered that the hybrid also has a maximum player count. At the beginning of this year, that was also about 100 players before things started going drastically wrong inside the hybrid. Using that system as is would have allowed us to get Pyro, but still with a player count of 100 across the shard. Just Stanton with 100 players in it already feels pretty dead, because there's over 1,000 points of interest. The chances of meeting someone at random is possible, but not high. To spread those players even thinner over even more area isn't a good idea. It's also not good for server efficiency. You can run 100 people on a single server right now. To put that across 3, one for the hybrid, one for Stanton, one for Pyro, is heading in the wrong direction for server overhead costs. This is why meshing went quiet for most of the year. They wrote an entire new message passing queue system. After several rounds of testing and development, as of the final meshing test, the new hybrid capacity before things start going wrong is about 8 to 900-ish. And that was in front of a mesh of 4 to 6 DGSs. In that configuration, a single hybrid could host more players than those servers would have held if they were all configured as separate shards. That's better for everyone, for the players, who now have a busier universe with more stuff in it, for the artists, who can now add the detail they've obviously always been wanting to, and for the business who can now support more players on less server hardware. Before CitizenCon, I made a prediction that 4.0 would be an open PTU over Christmas and would go live in January. I was happy sitting on that prediction right up until they stripped it to the bone, removing every feature that wasn't hard required to ship meshing and pyro. At this point, it was clear they had a target release window of before Christmas, and it was going to be shipped. Whether it was up to standard or not, I've seen this attitude from management before, and it results in shipped but buggy software that gets a poor reputation on launch and needs rescuing later. CIG seem to be fairly aware of this, and they've come up with a really interesting compromise. Given 4.0 was scheduled to be a hard wipe anyway, they've realised they can run them both in parallel. And they've left 3.24 up as well on the old persistence database, so that if 4.0 does end up being an unworkable bug fest, it's not like there's no functioning live environment at all. But the 4.0 database is the live database that will continue to be used, so unlike with PTU builds, what you do in the 4.0 build now will persist. I don't think they could have come up with a better compromise, to be honest, even though for some it's not really truly live until 3.24 is shut down. And they've thrown money at the 4.0 server configuration to give it the best possible chance. It has launched with 500 capacity shards in front of a mesh of 10 DGSs. Okay, that's across Stanton and Pyro, not just Stanton as it was in the meshing tests, but that is still a much lower per shard and per DGS capacity than the tests we were running at. This level of resourcing is keeping the server FPS high, and when things are working, it's actually running fairly smooth. CIG clearly want to give the game the best possible chance over Christmas. But even then, once you remember the hybrid is a server too, it's still not a lot more hardware per user than the previous configuration. Remember that 3.24 is already running some bits of meshing. It does have a hybrid and a single back-end DGS per shard. So that's 2 servers per 100 players. And the 10 to 500 mesh configuration with 11 servers, 1 hybrid and 10 GGSs per 500 players, is only 10% worse in server hardware per player. It's not like they've doubled the hardware per player for this, it's just not running anywhere near as efficiency as the meshing tests were. And I expect they'll rapidly improve this. They certainly made dramatic progress through the meshing tests. And to be fair to CIG, the meshing parts are working pretty smoothly. I've flown across several server boundaries a few times in the 4.0 preview now, and nothing directly meshing has stopped me from doing anything. Even when there was issues with quantum travel, this seemed to still happen within a single DGS, and wasn't related to server boundaries. The things letting this build down are honestly the things that have been dogging Star Citizen for some time. Elevators, transit, hangars, ATC, missions, client performance, and particularly at the moment, the whole login process. My first time in 4.0, I decided to roleplay a new player and run the tutorial. It's actually something I always do after a wipe, and I've only had it work properly once the very first time. As a professional game dev, if the tutorial is broken, this is the kind of thing that gets you a rocket from someone in middle management if you've even touched anything that sounds like it might be relevant. And the tutorial is the one thing they're willing to take late submissions to fix. So, I'm kinda surprised it's been broken this long. If they genuinely want to sort out the new player experience to onboard and retain new players, this needs to be made a lot more reliable, and in particular, reliable in the early phases of a patch, when there's higher discoverability with press coverage and so on. This time, I got further with it than I did last time, but I succumbed to a quantum jump to the orbital station which didn't go to the orbital station. Instead I had to mess about quantum travelling to other random places and aborting jumps to try and get within range of the orbital station. I succeeded at that in the end, and did get there, and I managed to land. But the tutorial was not satisfied I did what I should have, and I had to abandon it at that point. Other than the tutorial that I just failed and abandoned, there were no missions available to me at all. I did try the hotfix patch that was out at the same time, but that wasn't any better. I came back the next day and again, no missions. As an aside, why do I care about these basic missions? Some big names in the community have postulated that without basic missions, some people just don't know what to do in a sandbox environment and have to be led by the nose to go find things to do. Frankly, how patronising! This is really about the fact that when you haven't dropped at least mid-3 figures on this game, the basic deliver this box, investigate that wreck for an insurance company, take out those NPC pirates style missions are the basic way of making the necessary starting money to bootstrap into the more sandboxy ways of making money. Trading your own commodities requires a pile of aUEC to buy into some cargo. Oh, and don't forget the ship. I've lost count of the number of times I've looked at a how to make millions per hour trading cargo tutorial, and it starts with get in your C2 or something similar, and instantly closed it in disgust. Make enough aUEC to buy a C2 is the goal, not what do I do once I've got one. Sure, it's easy to make money when you start out with that kind of resources, but try that with a starter ship and pocket change and you aren't going anywhere. And with trading, one wrong move and you are down the entire cost of the cargo. Not back to square one, back to square minus 100. And it doesn't even have to be your wrong move. It's dead easy to lose a whole cargo load to a game bug. Prefer mining or salvage to cargo trading? You'll need to make the purchase cost of a prospector or a vulture first. But most of the missions have very little entrance requirements. The courier missions can be done in a starter ship. The small cargo missions are doable in a starter plus size ship with a multi-tool and a tractor beam attachment. And my objective right now in 4.0 is not to set up for an industrial empire just yet, but to earn enough to get a ship with a jump drive so I can go and have a look at Pyro. I've not seen that yet, and I want to have a sticky beak and find out what all the fuss is about, even if I'm probably going to be sticking to Stanton in the longer term. Coming back to 4.0 on a new day with missions available, Frequent Bugs was still making progress towards that goal. Impractical. Over a 2-hour session on Christmas Eve, I spent 15 minutes logging in and loading, only to have a server error at the end of it and have to do the same thing over again, another 15 minutes. It did work the second time though, but that's still half an hour just getting to the point where I can get out of bed. Then 5 minutes getting across town to my ship and accepting the starter hauling mission. 5 minutes to take off, fly to the starting point at the orbital station. On the plus side, quantum travel to it did work this time, albeit with a performance stutter so big it upset the screen recording software. 5 minutes traversing the station to the cargo deck and back to buy the big handheld tractor beam, because I'm probably going to need the big one later anyway. May as well get it now. At this point, I've been trying to play for 45 minutes and I've only just got to the point I can start loading cargo. 8 small boxes to load? No problem. But 3 boxes in, and I get a server crash. But it does recover. Okay, appears to have recovered successfully, and yay, I still have the mission. And it really did recover properly, right down to the box I was moving still being on the end of the tractor beam. However, less than a minute later, my ship vanishes. Having called it back up, the cargo that was on it is gone. And then I get a sort of crash. It wasn't strictly a crash, but it was almost a crash. Black screen, no UI, do have a mouse pointer that moves around, but I can't do anything else other than Alt F4 at that point. Logging straight back in, well, straight, that's another half hour for 2 runs through the logging queue at 15 minutes a time with an error between them, again, and the mission is gone. Okay, so the mission refactor has allowed them to survive server crashes and moving between DGSs as you go across a boundary, but not a bug that requires relogging in. Still more work required there. If they want to write a long-running storyline for 1.0, missions that persist between play sessions are going to be a hard requirement. I can call the ship back up, accept another starter cargo mission and find, you know what, the old boxes are on my ship, they're just invisible and immovable. I can stack new boxes on top of them, but I can't shift them. Well, the cargo capacity of my ship just went down by about 5 or so, until I get to claim it again. But I did get the new boxes loaded, flown to the destination, offloaded, and into an elevator. After 2 whole hours of trying to earn some money in-game to buy a jump-capable ship to look at Pyro for the first time, I've managed to unlock cargo hauling missions. And it's now time to log off and go make dinner. This is the level of not ready yet that 4.0 is, and none of that is really directly related to meshing, other than that other systems needed to be updated to fix bugs that meshing is exposed in them. This build was released too early, it wasn't ready, and it'll likely take a 4.01 sometime in January to sort things out. Nevertheless, after a fairly large drought over the past year, Star Citizen is moving again. Things are happening. I'm watching with interest to see where this goes. The actual meshing part of 4.0 is working pretty well, and there's still headroom to catch up with the player counts they had in the meshing tests, let alone make progress beyond that. We've already seen a hybrid run stably at a player count that could support a third system with the player density of the launch 4.0 configuration. With the rate of improvement we've seen from CIG over the past year, I have no doubt we'll see continual progress towards larger capacity shards, outstripping the rate at which new systems can be added. CIG have plans to pull the hybrid apart even further on the road to dynamic server meshing, which should offer significant improvements in player count per shard. With peak player counts extrapolated from some data which was released about the last year, it's not out of the realms of possibility to get to a single shard per region in the kind of time frame that Nyx or Castra are on, if we assume those player counts are fixed. But that's a bad assumption. As new features and systems are delivered, we should expect player count to rise, even if that's just existing backers coming back and checking out progress. Anyway, meshing is here, it's in players' hands, and it's no longer the bottleneck slowing down new content. So, what is the new bottleneck? Wait, that's enough for today. That's a topic for a whole other video. Did I do a better job explaining things this time? Is it worth me making that next video? Let me know in the comments below, and maybe I'll see you again for another video.